What's up, guys? Welcome back to Classic Octane. I am Taylor. So this morning I was doing what I always do and jumped on Craigslist and ended up finding a bike that we're going to go look at. It's not going to surprise you at all with what make it is. I'll wait to kind of show you guys what it is until we get there and we actually pick it up. But again, in making some more videos like this of kind of the day in the life of Classic Octane and trying to build a motorcycle business, we are going to go try to get a bike that we could potentially flip. So I am going to hook up my trailer just because it's a lot easier for me to load a bike on there by myself. And let's see if we can go get ourselves a bike. Thank you. Hooked up and ready to go. All right, just ran through the ATM to get some cash out. I figured I'd talk a little bit about how I typically find my bikes to flip. So most of my bikes are either found on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. And what I like to do is, instead of going to like a very specific search, like say you're looking for a CB 550, a KZ 400, whatever it is, instead of searching for that specifically, what I do is, like on Craigslist, I just put in a maximum year, model year. I generally go like 1978, maybe 1980, you know, obviously it depends on what kind of bike you're looking for, but that's the easiest way to find them for me. That also opens up the search to a lot of other models you may have not have thought of. And what I find is a lot of the bikes that I end up picking up that are good deals are kind of titled something super weird. It'll be like Honda Moto instead of like Honda Motorcycle, or, you know, CB space 750 written out in letters, you know, and it's like there's just not a kind of universal way to write the titles. So a lot of people that just don't know much about the bikes will kind of just put a very generic title on there, and that's the people that you end up, you know, typically getting the best deals from. So if you guys are in the market for a bike, I encourage you to, you know, jump on Craigslist. You can do the same thing on Facebook Marketplace and just do that maximum year. You could also, if you really want to sift through a lot of stuff, just click on motorcycle and then sort by, you know, the newest listings and just go through pages and see what you can find. So that's how I ended up finding this one. Yet to be determined if it's a good deal or not, but it's worth kind of driving, you know, a half hour down there to check it out on this Tuesday morning. So I'll keep you guys in the loop as we try to go pick up this bike. We're back in the truck. I just stopped to check the straps, but we picked it up. Here she is. Like I said, none of you should be surprised that it's a classic Honda, of course. Is there any other type of bike? So this is a 75 CB 750. The owner was very honest with me, which I couldn't be more appreciative of. Basically, when I got there to look at it, he did mention that the number 1 and number 4 cylinders were low on compression. He didn't actually mention exactly what the numbers were. We'll run our own compression test when we get it back to the shop. So I do have to keep that in mind, but even with that, I think we got a pretty good deal on it. It does have a clean title, which is worth a lot here in Texas. You kind of have to have that in order to really sell a bike. So clean title, 75 CB 750. The carbs and all that stuff are in the truck. Tank seems to be in good shape. It's definitely had some body work and needs some more body work, but the inside's been coated already. You know, we'll be getting rid of that seat, and we're kind of determining what we want to do with the project as a whole. But just wanted to give you a quick glimpse while I check the straps that we got ourselves another 750. So as you can see, the bike made it home safe. Before I pulled it off the trailer, I figured this would be a good time for me to not only give you guys a good overview of the bike, but also run through my thought process when I go to buy one of these projects. What do I look for? What would I avoid? All of that kind of stuff, because I've had a few people ask me for that kind of information, so I'll do my best to kind of cover it now. So what I look for is going to be a little bit different than just your average, you know, home mechanic that's going to pick up a bike to build for themselves. I'm looking at buying these bikes and their resale, you know, value when it's done, what it's going to take me to get it to that point, potential profit margins, that kind of stuff, which again, if you're building the bike to yourself, you're probably a little bit less concerned about that. a lot of the same stuff is going to apply. So we'll start with not even the bike itself. We'll start with a title. So for me, a title is super important. I have bought bikes without titles, but it would have to be dirt cheap for me to be willing to do that. Basically buying it for parts if it doesn't have a title, because in Texas, it is mandatory to have a title to be able to register a bike. You can go through a bonded title process, which is totally fine if you're keeping the bike for yourself. You can get the bonded title. It doesn't cost a huge amount of money. There's a lot of steps to jump through, but once you have that bonded title, it's a couple of years, and then assuming nobody tries to claim the bike as stolen or as their property, you get a clean title. So if you are building a bike to keep for yourself, that's totally fine. If you're someone like me who's, probably going to only own this bike for, maybe a couple of months, a clean title is a lot more important. So this bike does have a good clean Texas title, so that immediately puts it high up on the list of something that's worth buying for me. Next, we actually get to the inspection of the bike. So we start to look at all of the biggest components, the frame of the bike, of course the engine, and then get into kind of wheels and that kind of stuff. So some of the stuff on the bike, I don't care what the condition is. I don't care the condition of this seat because I'm not going to keep it. I don't really care the condition of the tires because I want to change them for a different look anyway. But if you are going to be keeping those things, of course the condition of those makes a big difference for you. So that's something you'll have to keep in mind. Going to look at a project with kind of the end goal in mind will help because again, the condition of the tank. If you're going for a concourse restoration, this tank isn't going to be a good fit for you because where the emblems go has already been shaved off and it's been kind of modified. For somebody who's going to build this most likely into a custom bike, that's not as important for me. Again, if the tires and all this stuff just becomes items that you can use to negotiate. So if the tires are shot and the seat's shot and this and that, you start to, talk to the person selling the bike, mention those things. It'll get you in a little bit better position to negotiate the price. So I look at the frame. What I'm looking for when I look at the frame is any kind of, bent neck, any cracking, any heavy rust holes, anything like that. I'm not too terribly concerned about light surface rust like you can see on here because that's a, clean the rust off, get it down to bare metal, repaint it, and it will be totally fine. It does not hurt the structure of the frame itself. Also looking for if there's any past modifications. A lot of the times if there's a modification done in the past, you have to then, see the condition or the quality of that. You could very well have gotten somebody that knew what they were doing and modified it. And if it's, along the path of what you want to do with the bike, cool. If you're trying to do a stock restoration, you might not want a bike that has the back end, chopped off. After, you kind of give a good overview of the frame, I move on to the engines. So the engine is this kind of interesting thing because for somebody like me who has spare, CB750 motors sitting on the shelf, has experience pulling the engines and working on them, the overall condition of the engine is important, but, it's not going to totally discourage me from buying a project. If this is your first bike and the motor's locked up, or like this one, potentially has low compression, it may not be a good idea for you to go after it. Just if that's, gonna make the project take 2 years instead of 2 months because you don't know what's involved in kind of getting that back up and running. It may be better for you to just buy a running driving bike instead of, one that's in this condition. I'm also looking for, what is missing off of the engine. So the carburetors are off, but they came in a separate box. So I know that I have a full set of carburetors because a nice set of, carburetors that even still need to be rebuilt are still a couple of $100. So that's a big chunk of money that you would potentially have to spend if you didn't have them. And then when you're looking at the engine, a big thing you'll want to do is turn the motor over. So on these classic Hondas, you can use a kickstart to turn it over. You could go as far if the bike is complete enough to throw a jump box on the battery and try to use the electric start. You just have to make sure you are checking oil levels and stuff. You don't want to be turning this motor over if it's completely dry. When you kick it over, you can kind of tell if it has compression or not just by how much it pushes back. You can kind of hear the compression in the exhaust. It's something that's going to come with, you know, more experience. It's going to be easier for you to tell, but you're looking to make sure, one, it's not completely seized where you can't kick it over at all, and two, it doesn't just like flop freely, meaning there's zero compression. So you're looking for somewhere kind of right in the middle. If you're not sure, I mean, bring a compression tester. It's not that hard to pull some spark plugs out and run a little, you know, compression test right there in the garage before you pick up the bike. So that's something that, you know, if you are not wanting to dive into a motor, you'll want to definitely take some time and make sure that the one you're looking at is going to be kind of able to be brought back easily. In my experience with a lot of these classic Hondas, if they turn over freely and at least sound like they have some compression, there's a really good chance they're going to run. These bikes are super reliable, even if they've been sitting for a number of years. Another thing you can do while you're looking at the engine is check the oil. This bike, the oil tank is completely dry, which could be a bad sign. It could be, okay, all of the oil leaked out somewhere. It could be, you know, a number of different things. If the bike has been sitting outside with no oil in it, it could potentially build up some rust on the inside from condensation. Because I've got a good feeling I'm at least going to have to get into the top end of this motor, I wasn't too terribly concerned about it, but the oil can tell you a lot of, you know, how fresh it is. If somebody's, you know, changed it recently, if it's got fuel in it, that can tell you that you might have an issue with your carbs and it leaked fuel all the way through, went into the cylinder, leaked past the piston, and now your oil is really thin, Scott. So the oil can kind of give you a little bit of an indication. Fortunately on this one, it doesn't have any oil, so it's not going to really tell us much. So when you're looking at the condition of the gas tank, you know, it's important to kind of shine a light down in there. I can tell that this one's been sealed with a red coat or whatever it's called, tank sealer. So it seems to be in pretty decent shape in there. Hopefully that red coat isn't hiding any crimes, but kind of hard to tell now. So you'll want to check in there and see if there's a bunch of rust buildup. You know, what is the overall condition? A lot of the times, you know, those can be brought back, but again, it's just adding to that list of stuff you need to do, money you need to spend to get the bike up to where you want it to be. You know, and then everything else is pretty much just what you would expect to look for. Are you going to keep these gauges? What are the condition of the gauges? The condition of the handlebars? Do they look bent? Does the bike look like it's been laid over at some point? You know, 90% of these Hondas that I've messed with have been on their side at least once. So you can generally tell that by a scraped up side of the handlebars, scraped up foot pegs, side of the engine. You know, it's the furthest points out are what typically hits the ground first. Again, it's not going to discourage me from buying a bike. It's just, okay, if it's got a broken side mirror and a scraped up gauge and a scraped up engine cover, you know, I'm going to have to fix those things if I want this thing to be worth, you know, the most money and have the most, you know, potential profit when the project is done. Braking system is something that pretty much every old Honda just budget rebuilding the front caliper and the front master cylinder. It's, you know, a total of, even if you had to replace everything, it's about $100, $150 for a whole new caliper, stainless line, master cylinder, everything. So not a huge deal breaker. Just keep that in mind. Pretty much every one of them is either seized or just leaked out and doesn't have any fluid, and the front brakes rarely work. So don't be concerned about that. I can't really think of anything else that's super important for you guys to look at. So I hope that gives you, you know, some information. So just a kind of a 10-second recap. Go look at a bike and have your end project in mind and start to subtract what does that end project look like versus what does the bike in front of you look like, and try to make a mental list of everything you're going to have to do to that bike. And, you know, if you can associate a dollar amount to that, if you're trying to flip the bike, or if you're just trying to build the bike for yourself and you have to stick to a budget, you know, don't get yourself in over your head. I think 9 times out of 10, the projects that people end up giving up on are ones that they got a little bit too ambitious when they bought the bike, and they're like, oh, I can rebuild that engine and do all this. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of people don't kind of follow through on that. So starting with a project that is, you know, maybe a little bit more expensive, but is less work and is going to be on the road sooner is generally the way to go for most people, especially if you're just starting out doing this. Well, that's where I'm gonna call it on this one, guys. I appreciate you guys coming along, and I hope you enjoyed this new style of video. Okay, I could hear you guys yelling at the screen. I was leaving you hanging. So what do you say we just run a compression test and find out for sure how we're doing. So I got the jumper box hooked up, and you could bring a jumper box with you and do this, you know, before you buy the bike too. I'm gonna turn my key on, make sure nothing starts smoking or anything. You don't know how long this electrical system has been sitting. We can see we have an oil light on and a neutral light on, which is exactly what we'd expect. I did shine a light down in the oil tank, and there actually was like 2 inches of oil. So I just topped it up. So it actually did have oil in the system, which is a good sign. So next thing I tried was I hit the start button. And the start button doesn't do a darn thing. So not a huge deal. Let me show you what to do if the start button doesn't work. Easiest thing to do is pull this side cover off over here. And be careful when you do this. This is not, you know, do not try this at home is my official disclaimer. But you can jump both poles of the starter solenoid with an old screwdriver. You can also get like a little trigger that you can basically, you could just send 12 volts to this yellow wire with a red stripe. However you want to do that, little jumper wire off the battery, whatever it may be. I'm going to do it this way. Again, I'm just going to put this out there. I don't recommend doing this. I can show you that it works, but don't do it ever for any reason. It will spark, so just be aware of that. See? And it turns over. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and grab what 18, 19, whatever the spark plug socket is. I'm going to pull some spark plugs out. We'll hook up the compression tester and see how we do. Got the compression tester hooked up in cylinder number 4, which is one of the ones they said was low. Fingers crossed. Let's see what happens. That is certainly low, about 55 or so. So what we can do now is I'm going to dribble a little bit of oil into that cylinder. And if it seals up and our compression numbers go way up, we can tell that it's probably rings. If it doesn't make much of a difference, it could be as simple as the valves being out of adjustment. So fingers crossed. Let's dribble some oil down in there and then do it again. A couple of squirts of oil down the cylinder. Let's give her another shot. $180. So yeah, that points to it being our rings. So I would say good news, bad news, but that's pretty much just bad news. Expected news, I guess. So this motor will need a top end rebuild. So we can start to play around with what we want to do. Since this head does have some damage, I'm kind of leaning towards just taking one of my 750 motors that's over here under the shelf. Right here we have these two to choose from. One of these is seized and one of them isn't. So we'll basically probably start to test the condition. I don't remember which one's seized and which one isn't. I believe this one is the seized one and the black one is not. Maybe we'll run a compression test on that to see if, you know, it seems healthy. If not, we'll just plan on doing a top end rebuild. So again, this was known information when I bought this bike, and the purchase price was kind of set accordingly. So this is something that would devastate you if you paid a full price not knowing this, and you get home and then you realize you're gonna have to pull the motor out and rebuild the top end. So this is why it's important to check the condition of the motor before you start to negotiate and before you take the bike home. So, well, that's where I'm gonna end it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this new format. Just like the last video, I'm just kind of grabbing the GoPro and filming what I do in a given day. So we have a new project, not a small one, but one that I think is gonna be profitable for the business. One other thing I want to mention, I need to start to mess with my GoPro settings. I've started to notice there's like this weird black kind of shadowy line, and I guess it's some kind of interference with the exposure or shutter speed or something with my LED lights in the shop. So I did, I've noticed that in the video, and I will work on getting that fixed. If it doesn't work, then I'll switch back to using the big camera, or maybe get a point and shoot or something. But I appreciate you guys following along, and I'll see you guys in the next video.